October 2012. A cold morning in Dayton, Ohio. An 11-year-old girl in a wheelchair waited for her school bus at the corner of Maple and Jefferson, clutching a notebook full of drawings and a pair of brand-new red shoes she'd never worn. She vanished. 2 days later, those shoes appeared hanging on a barbed wire fence along Route 4, pristine, perfectly aligned, as if placed there with ceremony. No blood, no struggle, no trace of the girl or the bus. Just shoes, swaying in the autumn wind like a message no one could decode. What the police discovered in the days that followed would reveal a darkness that had been hiding in plain sight for over 20 years. A network of corruption, faith twisted into horror, and children who disappeared into a place where suffering was called salvation. This is the story of a mother who refused to accept silence, and a little girl who left breadcrumbs in the dark, praying someone would be brave enough to follow them. If you want to see more incredible stories that will move your soul and challenge everything you think you know about human nature, follow our channel, leave a like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. The October morning came cold and cruel to Dayton, Ohio, the kind of cold that bites through wool and settles into bones. Dawn hadn't yet broken over Route 4 when Rebecca Hayes sat in her wheelchair at the corner of Maple and Jefferson, her small frame barely visible beneath layers of hand-me-down winter clothing. She was 11 years old, though people often mistook her for younger. Something about the way her legs hung motionless, or how her eyes seemed too large for her face, as if they'd grown to compensate for all the places her body couldn't take her. Her mother, Angela, had left for the hospital at 4:30 that morning, just like every morning, to scrub floors and empty bedpans for $8 an hour. Before leaving, she'd kissed Rebecca's forehead 3 times, always 3 times their ritual, and whispered, "Be brave, baby girl. Mama's coming back." Rebecca had nodded, even though the knot in her stomach had been growing tighter each morning for the past 2 weeks, ever since the new bus driver started. The shoes dangled from the arm of her wheelchair in a clear plastic bag, catching what little light filtered through the gray sky. They were brand new, bright red Converse with white laces, a birthday gift that had arrived in the mail with no return address, just a note in shaky cursive, "For the girl who dreams of running. Love, Grandma Rose." The grandmother Rebecca had never met, the one her mother refused to talk about, whose name turned Angela's face to stone whenever it was mentioned. Rebecca had cried when she opened the box, not from sadness but from something more complicated, a longing for something she couldn't name, for someone who knew her dreams without ever meeting her. She clutched her spiral notebook against her chest, the one with the bent cover and pages thick with colored pencil drawings. In her private world of paper and imagination, Rebecca could do everything her body denied her. She drew herself running through fields of wildflowers, climbing trees with branches that touched the clouds, dancing in rain puddles without fear of falling. Her art teacher, Mrs. Chen, said she had an old soul's eye for detail, which Rebecca thought sounded both beautiful and sad, like most things people said about her. The bus was late. It was never late. Rebecca glanced at the cheap digital watch on her wrist, the one with the cracked face that her mother had bought at Walmart. 7:43 a.m. The bus always came at 7:35. Always. Mr. Travis, the regular driver, was obsessively punctual, a Vietnam vet who'd told her once that time is the only thing we control in this world, kiddo. But Mr. Travis had been gone for 2 weeks now. Medical leave, the school said. The substitute driver, the one whose name nobody seemed to know or remember, had been irregular at best, unsettling at worst. There was something about him that made Rebecca's skin crawl. He never smiled, never made small talk with the kids like Mr. Travis did. He wore the same dark clothes every day, black pants, black jacket, and a gray baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. When he helped her onto the lift, his hands were always ice cold, even through her jacket, and he smelled like old books and something medicinal, something that reminded her of the funeral home where they'd gone when her father died 3 years ago. The previous Friday, he'd said something strange. As Rebecca rolled onto the bus, he'd leaned down, close enough that she could see the deep lines carved into his gaunt face like rivers on a map, and whispered, "You draw beautiful things, child. But do you know what beauty requires?" She'd frozen, unsure how he knew about her drawings, unsure what he meant. Before she could respond, he'd straightened up and shut the door, driving in complete silence for the entire route. That night, Rebecca had drawn him. She couldn't help it. When something frightened her, she drew it. as if transferring the fear onto paper made it less real. She'd sketched his profile from memory, the sharp nose, the hollow cheeks, the cap casting shadows across his face. But as she drew, something else emerged on the page, something she hadn't consciously intended. Behind him, barely visible in the shading, she'd drawn a building with tall windows and a cross on top. And in the corner, almost hidden, a small figure in a wheelchair, reaching towards something just out of frame. She'd ripped the page out and hidden it under her mattress, ashamed of the fear it represented, ashamed that she couldn't explain why her hand had drawn things she'd never seen. Now, sitting alone on the empty corner as the minutes ticked past 8 o'clock, Rebecca felt that same inexplicable dread crawling up her spine. The street was eerily quiet. Old Mrs. Patterson, who usually shuffled out to water her dead lawn around this time, was nowhere to be seen. The stray dog that always barked at the bus hadn't appeared. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned this particular stretch of road. Rebecca opened her notebook to a fresh page and began to draw, because drawing was what she did when she was afraid. Her colored pencils moved quickly, brown for fence posts, silver for barbed wire, green for the overgrown grass along Route 4. She drew the landscape she saw every day from the bus window, the abandoned farmland that stretched for miles, the old barn with the collapsed roof, the fence line that seemed to go on forever. But then her hand moved without her conscious direction, adding details she didn't recognize. A white van parked on the shoulder of the road. A man standing beside it, his face a blank oval because she couldn't quite see his features in her mind's eye. And there, hanging on the fence, red shoes, her shoes, the ones in the plastic bag beside her. Her hand trembled. She dropped the pencil. What was she drawing? Why had she drawn her own shoes hanging on a fence like they were abandoned, like they belonged to someone who was gone? The sound of an engine broke the silence. Rebecca's head snapped up, relief flooding through her. The bus. Finally. But as the vehicle rounded the corner, that relief curdled into something else. The bus moved slowly, too slowly, as if the driver was searching for something. When it came to a stop in front of her, the door hissed open, but no one emerged to help her with the lift. "Hello?" Rebecca called out, her voice small in the morning air. Silence. Then footsteps, heavy and deliberate, descending the stairs. The substitute driver appeared, but something was different about him today. His clothes were the same, all black-gray cap, but his eyes, those eyes that were usually hidden in shadow, were now visible and fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to wheel backward. "Good morning, Rebecca," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "I've been looking forward to our ride today." "The lift," she managed to say, pointing to the mechanical platform that would raise her wheelchair into the bus. He didn't move to activate it. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her like she was a specimen in a jar. "You're a special girl, Rebecca. Do you know that? Special girls require special care." Terror gripped her throat. "I want to wait for another bus. I don't feel well." "There is no other bus." He descended the last step and moved toward her. "And you've been chosen. Not everyone is chosen. You should feel honored." Rebecca grabbed the wheels of her chair and tried to spin around, tried to roll away, but he was faster. His cold hands gripped the handles of her wheelchair, and before she could scream, something pressed against her face. A cloth, damp and chemical-smelling. The world tilted sideways. Her notebook fell from her lap, pages fluttering open to the drawing she'd just made. The fence, the van, the shoes. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the plastic bag with her red Converse shoes slipping from the arm of her wheelchair and falling to the ground, landing softly on the cracked pavement of Maple Street, as if they'd been gently placed there, as if they were saying goodbye. 2 days later, Harold Griffin was checking his fence line along Route 4, preparing for the first frost, when he saw them. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks. Age and too many tours in the Gulf had left him with a mind that sometimes wandered into unreliable territory. But no, they were real. A pair of brand-new red Converse shoes, laces tied together, hanging perfectly from the barbed wire fence that separated his property from the road. They swayed slightly in the October wind, pristine and bright against the gray morning. No mud, no scuffs, no signs of struggle. Just shoes hanging like a memorial, like a message, like a scream frozen in time. Harold stood there for a long time, his weathered hands gripping his work gloves, staring at those shoes. He'd seen a lot in his 63 years. Bodies in the desert, friends dying in his arms, the slow decay of his marriage, and the even slower decay of his faith. But something about these shoes, their deliberate placement, their impossible cleanliness, made his blood run cold in a way that combat never had. He knew, with the certainty of someone who'd seen evil in its purest form, that this was no accident. This was theater. This was someone sending a message. But to whom? And why here, on his fence, on his land? He pulled out his cell phone, one of those flip phones he barely knew how to use, and with shaking fingers dialed 911. The operator answered, her voice bright and professional. 911, what's your emergency? Harold opened his mouth, but the words stuck in his throat. How do you explain that you found shoes on a fence and you just know, that they mean something terrible? How do you make someone understand that evil has left its calling card in your backyard? There are shoes, he finally said, his voice rough. On my fence. Red shoes. I think something very bad has happened. 40 minutes later, Sheriff Roy Daniels stood beside Harold, staring at the same shoes. A small crowd had gathered, deputies, a state trooper who happened to be passing through, a news van that had picked up the call on the scanner. Everyone was silent, as if speaking would somehow make it real, would transform those shoes from a strange anomaly into evidence of something unspeakable. Sheriff Daniels was a third-generation law enforcement officer, a man who prided himself on his calm demeanor and his ability to handle crisis without panic. But as he stood there, looking at those perfect red shoes with their white laces catching the morning light, he felt something he hadn't felt in his 25 years of service. Pure, undiluted dread. Get me a description of every missing child in the county, he said quietly to his deputy. Every single one. And find out who was supposed to be on this road in the last 48 hours. School buses, delivery trucks, everything. But even as he gave the orders, Sheriff Daniels knew that those shoes were telling a story that was going to break this town apart. He knew it in his bones, the way old injuries know when rain is coming. Someone had taken a child. Someone had left these shoes as a signature, as proof, as a taunt. This isn't an accident, he whispered, echoing Harold's earlier thought. This is a message. As the sheriff photographed the scene and his deputies began canvassing the area, none of them noticed the small detail that would later haunt their investigation. In the grass beneath the shoes, pressed into the soft earth by the recent rain, was the faint track of a wheelchair tire. One single track, leading from the road to the fence and then disappearing, as if the chair and the person in it had simply vanished into air. Harold Griffin hadn't slept properly in 48 hours. The shoes haunted him, not just their presence on his fence, but something deeper, something that clawed at the edges of his memory like a half-remembered nightmare. He sat in his kitchen at 3 in the morning, the same kitchen where his ex-wife used to make coffee before she left him 15 years ago, staring at a bottle of whiskey he'd promised himself he wouldn't open. The promise lasted until 3:15. The police had questioned him for hours. Where were you on Tuesday morning? Did you see anything unusual, any vehicles, any people? Harold had answered as best he could, his mind foggy with age and trauma and the medication he took to keep the Gulf War memories at bay. Yes, he'd seen a vehicle. White, maybe a van, maybe a truck. It had been parked on the shoulder of Route 4 around dawn. He'd noticed it because vehicles rarely stopped on that particular stretch. There was nothing there but abandoned farmland and his property. But the details? The license plate? The driver? Those were lost in the haze of his unreliable memory, buried beneath layers of other mornings, other roads, other vehicles that might have been real, or might have been phantoms conjured by a mind that no longer distinguished clearly between past and present. What Harold didn't tell the police, what he couldn't tell them because it made him sound insane, was that the shoes felt familiar. Not the shoes themselves, but the act of finding them, the deliberate placement, the theatrical cruelty of it. It reminded him of something, a memory that danced just out of reach, like trying to remember a dream after waking. As the whiskey burned down his throat, Harold stood and walked to the narrow staircase that led to his attic. He hadn't been up there in years. The stairs were steep, his knees were bad, and there was nothing up there but dust and boxes of a life he'd rather forget. But tonight, driven by something he couldn't name, he climbed. The attic smelled like decay and old paper. Cardboard boxes were stacked against the walls, labeled in his ex-wife's neat handwriting. Christmas decorations, tax records 1995-2000, Harold's military stuff. He ignored those and moved to the corner, where 3 unlabeled boxes sat covered in a thick layer of dust. His hands trembled as he opened the first one. Inside were drawings, dozens of them. Children's drawings on construction paper, some faded with age, others still vibrant with color. Harold's breath caught in his throat. He'd forgotten about these. No, not forgotten. Buried. Deliberately buried. 10 years ago, maybe 11, Harold had volunteered at the local community center's after-school program. It was his therapist's idea, part of his PTSD treatment. Engage with the community, Harold. Help children. It will give you purpose. For 6 months, he'd supervise the art room every Thursday, watching kids draw and paint while he sat in the corner, silent and uncomfortable but present. The program coordinator, a cheerful woman named Susan, had been so grateful for his help that when the program shut down due to budget cuts, she'd given him all the artwork the kids had made, thinking he'd want to remember them. But Harold hadn't wanted to remember. He'd wanted to forget those 6 months. Forget how the children's laughter had made him feel both comforted and devastated. Forget how their innocence had thrown his own darkness into sharp relief. So he'd shoved the boxes into the attic and never looked at them again. Until now. He pulled out drawing after drawing, scanning signatures, looking for something he wasn't sure existed. And then he found it. A piece of yellow construction paper, slightly crumpled, with a drawing in colored pencil. A little girl in a wheelchair, surrounded by flowers. The girl had enormous eyes and a smile that seemed both hopeful and sad. In the corner, in careful child's handwriting, Rebecca Hayes, age 8, October 2009. Harold's hands shook so violently that he nearly dropped the paper. 3 years ago. She'd been in his art room 3 years ago. How had he forgotten? How had he not made the connection when the police showed him the school photograph, when they asked if he recognized the missing girl? But even as he asked himself these questions, he knew the answer. He'd trained himself not to remember faces, not to form attachments, not to let anyone in. It was survival. After the war, after his marriage fell apart, after he'd lost everything that mattered, forgetting had become his only defense against pain. He sat on the dusty attic floor, holding Rebecca's drawing, and let himself remember. She'd been quiet, he recalled now. Quieter than the other children. She'd sat in the corner with her wheelchair pulled up to a small table, drawing for the entire hour without speaking to anyone. The other kids had played and fought and laughed, but Rebecca had just drawn, her small hands moving with intense concentration, creating worlds on paper. Harold remembered asking her once what she was drawing. She'd looked up at him with those enormous eyes, the same eyes that stared at him now from the police photograph, and said, "Places I want to go, things I want to do." Then she'd returned to her drawing, dismissing him with the natural self-possession of a child who'd learned early that adults were unreliable. He'd thought about her sometimes over the years, wondered vaguely how she was doing, if she was still drawing, if life had been kind to her. But he'd never sought her out, never tried to maintain contact. That would have required hope, and hope was a luxury Harold couldn't afford. Now she was gone, vanished, and her shoes had appeared on his fence like an accusation. Harold gathered all of Rebecca's drawings, there were 7 in total spanning those 6 months, and brought them downstairs. He laid them out on his kitchen table and studied them with a clarity that the police interrogation hadn't afforded him. Most were innocent. Flowers, butterflies, imaginary landscapes. But 2 were different. In one, drawn in November 2009, Rebecca had sketched a large building with tall windows and a cross on the roof. Below it, she'd written, "The Glory Place," in her careful handwriting. Harold didn't recognize the building, but something about it made his skin crawl. The second disturbing drawing was dated December 2009, right before Christmas. It showed a man in a hat and long coat, standing beside what looked like a van or bus. The man's face was blank, just an empty oval, but there was something menacing about his posture, the way he seemed to loom over the tiny figure of a girl in a wheelchair. At the bottom, Rebecca had written, "The Man Who Watches." Harold's blood turned to ice. Even 3 years ago, even as a child, Rebecca had been afraid of someone, had been drawing her fear, documenting it the only way she knew how. And Harold had seen these drawings, had been in a position to ask questions, to notice, to help, and he'd done nothing. He'd forgotten. He'd chosen to forget. The guilt was suffocating. He reached for the phone to call the police, to tell them about the drawings, about Rebecca's connection to his property, about everything he'd remembered, but his hand froze halfway to the receiver. If he called now, they'd want to know why he hadn't remembered earlier. They'd question his story, his reliability. They might even suspect him, a reclusive veteran with memory problems, living alone on the property where the shoes were found, who conveniently forgot that he knew the victim. It looked bad. It looked very bad. Harold stared at the drawing spread across his table, at Rebecca's careful handwriting, at the fear she'd tried to express through crayon and paper, and he made a decision. He wouldn't call the police. Not yet. First, he needed to remember more. He needed to figure out what the glory place was and who the man who watches had been. Because Harold had the terrible suspicion that Rebecca's disappearance wasn't random, wasn't spontaneous. It had been planned, maybe for years, and somehow impossibly his property had become part of that plan. As dawn broke over Route 4, Harold sat at his kitchen table studying a little girl's drawings, trying to piece together a puzzle he'd been too broken to see 3 years ago. Outside, the red shoes still hung on his fence, swaying in the October wind, waiting for someone to understand their message. Angela Hayes stood in the principal's office of Jefferson Elementary School, her hospital scrubs still damp with disinfectant, her eyes red-rimmed from 3 days of crying and no sleep. Across the desk sat Principal Garrett, a man whose expensive suit and careful smile had always made Angela feel poor and insignificant. Today that smile was gone, replaced by something that looked like concern but felt like evasion. "Mrs. Hayes, I understand you're upset, but accusing the school of negligence—" "My daughter is missing," Angela interrupted, her voice shaking with rage she could barely contain. "She got on a school bus that you provided, with a driver that you hired, and now she's gone. So yes, Mr. Garrett, I'm accusing you of negligence. I'm accusing you of not giving a damn about the safety of these children." Principal Garrett's jaw tightened. The substitute driver came highly recommended. His background check was clean. There was no reason to suspect. "What was his name?" Angela demanded, leaning forward. "The police asked me, and I couldn't tell them because I don't know." Rebecca never mentioned his name. None of the other kids seemed to know it. Even your secretary couldn't find it in the records. "So tell me, Mr. Garrett, what was the name of the man you trusted with my daughter?" The silence that followed was damning. Principal Garrett shuffled papers on his desk, avoiding her eyes. "There seems to be some confusion in our files. The temporary employment agency that provided the substitute." "Which agency?" Another pause. "We're having trouble locating that information." Angela felt her world tilt. "You don't know. You hired a man to drive children, my disabled daughter, and you don't know his name or where he came from?" "Mrs. Hayes, please understand. We process many temporary workers. Sometimes in the administrative shuffle—" "Don't you dare." Angela's voice dropped to a whisper that was more terrifying than her earlier shout. "Don't you dare blame this on paperwork. You let a stranger take my baby, and now you can't even tell me who he was." She stormed out of the office before Garrett could respond, before she did something she'd regret. In the hallway, she nearly collided with Mrs. Chen, Rebecca's art teacher, who'd been hovering outside the door. The older woman's face was creased with genuine concern, and when she touched Angela's arm, the gesture was so kind that Angela almost broke down completely. "I need to show you something, Mrs. Chen whispered, glancing nervously back toward the principal's office. "Not here. Can you meet me at the Riverside Diner in an hour?" Angela nodded, too exhausted to question, too desperate for any information to refuse. The diner was nearly empty when Angela arrived. Just a few truck drivers hunched over coffee at the counter. Mrs. Chen sat in a corner booth, a manila folder in front of her. Her hands trembled slightly as Angela slid into the seat across from her. "I could lose my job for this," Mrs. Chen began, "but I can't sleep at night knowing what I know and not telling you." She pushed the folder across the table. "These are copies of Rebecca's art assignments from the past 3 months. I kept them because they worried me." Angela opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were photocopies of Rebecca's drawings. Not the cheerful, imaginative pieces her daughter usually created, but darker images. A building with barred windows and a cross. A man with no face standing beside a vehicle. A group of children holding hands, their mouths open as if screaming, though no sound came out. And in every single drawing, somewhere in the corner or background, a small detail. A white dove, always the same white dove, wings spread as if trying to escape. "What is this building?" Angela asked. pointing to the structure that appeared in multiple drawings. "I don't know," Mrs. Chen admitted, "but Rebecca drew it obsessively, and last month she wrote something on the back of one drawing." The teacher flipped over one of the copies. In Rebecca's handwriting were the words, "Glory Shelter, where Grandma Rose went." Angela's blood froze. Grandma Rose, her mother, the woman she hadn't spoken to in 12 years, not since the night Angela had run away at 17, pregnant and terrified. Rose Hayes had been involved with a religious group, some kind of fundamentalist community that believed in purifying the afflicted through suffering. When Angela's father had died in a factory accident, Rose had become obsessed with the idea that his death was punishment for sin, that only through extreme devotion could they be saved. Angela had escaped that madness, built a new life, and never looked back. She'd told Rebecca that her grandmother was dead because it was easier than explaining that some people's faith becomes so twisted, it turns into poison. "Glory Shelter," Angela repeated, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "I thought it was gone. I thought they shut it down." "They?" Mrs. Chen leaned forward. "Angela, what are you talking about?" Angela's mind raced back through years she'd tried to forget. Glory Shelter had been a children's home run by Reverend Elliot Warren, a charismatic preacher who'd convinced dozens of families in the rural areas around Dayton that disabled and troubled children needed special spiritual intervention. Rose had volunteered there when Angela was a teenager, had talked endlessly about the beautiful work they were doing, saving innocent souls. But Angela had heard rumors, whispers from other kids at school about children who went to Glory Shelter and came back different, haunted, broken. When Angela got pregnant at 16, Rose had tried to send her there. "They'll take care of you," Rose had said, her eyes bright with zealous conviction. "They'll purify the sin from your body." Angela had run that same night, hitchhiking to Columbus with nothing but the clothes on her back and $40 stolen from her mother's purse. "It was a religious institution," Angela said slowly. "They claimed to help children with disabilities, children from poor families. But there were always stories about abuse, about kids being locked in rooms for days as spiritual discipline. About 10 or 12 years ago, there was an investigation and they shut it down. At least I thought they did." "And your mother was involved?" "She was a true believer." Angela's voice was bitter. "She thought suffering brought you closer to God. The more you hurt, the more pure you became." Mrs. Chen's face had gone pale. "Angela, Rebecca received a package at school about 3 months ago. A birthday gift. It was delivered to my classroom by mistake. The office sometimes sends mail there if a student is in art class. It was a pair of red shoes and a note signed Grandma Rose." The world stopped. The red shoes. The ones hanging on the fence. The ones Rebecca had been so excited about. The ones she'd kept in the plastic bag like precious treasures. They'd come from Rose. From a woman Angela had told her daughter was dead. "Did you read the note?" Angela asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Mrs. Chen nodded miserably. It said, "For the girl who dreams of running, you are special, Rebecca. You are chosen. When the time comes, these shoes will carry you home." I thought it was odd, but Rebecca was so happy. She said her grandmother knew her, really knew her, even though they'd never met. I should have told you, but I didn't want to ruin her joy. She had so little of it. Chosen. The word echoed in Angela's mind. It was the same word the religious group had used. Chosen children, chosen for purification, chosen for salvation. And somehow, after all these years, they'd found Rebecca. They'd been watching her, planning, preparing. And Angela, working herself to death to provide for her daughter, had never noticed. "Where was Glory Shelter located?" Angela asked urgently. "Do you know?" "I can find out," Mrs. Chen said, already pulling out her phone. "I have a friend who works at the county records office." While Mrs. Chen made calls, Angela stared at the drawings spread across the table. Her daughter had been trying to tell her something, had been documenting her fear the only way she knew how, and Angela had been too exhausted, too distracted by bills and shifts and survival to see it. 20 minutes later, Mrs. Chen had an address, 4782 Old Mill Road, about 15 miles outside Dayton, near the border with Greene County. The property had been sold to the county after Glory Shelter closed, sat empty for years, then was quietly purchased 6 months ago by a private buyer listed only as Warren Holdings LLC. Warren, the same name as the reverend who'd founded the shelter. Angela stood up so quickly she knocked her coffee cup over. brown liquid spreading across the table like a stain. I need to go there. Right now. Angela, you should call the police. The police think I'm hysterical. They think Rebecca ran away, that she'll turn up in a few days. They're not taking this seriously. Angela grabbed the folder of drawings. But I know the truth. My mother has her. That religious cult has my daughter, and I'm going to get her back. Mrs. Chen reached across the table and gripped Angela's hand. Then I'm coming with you. You shouldn't face this alone. As they left the diner and climbed into Angela's battered Honda Civic, neither woman noticed the black sedan that had been parked across the street, or the way it pulled out behind them, maintaining a careful distance. Someone was watching. Someone always had been. The property at 4782 Old Mill Road looked like it had been forgotten by time itself. Angela and Mrs. Chen sat in the idling Honda, staring at what remained of Glory Shelter through the cracked windshield. The main building was a 3-story structure of weathered brick, its windows boarded up with plywood that had turned gray from years of rain and sun. A rusted chain-link fence surrounded the property, topped with barbed wire that sagged in places like tired arms. The cross that had once crowned the roof lay broken in the overgrown grass, split down the middle as if struck by lightning, or torn down in rage. "This can't be the place," Mrs. Chen whispered, though her voice carried no conviction. "It looks abandoned." But Angela knew better. She'd learned long ago that the worst horrors often hid behind facades of decay and neglect. She pushed open the car door, the October wind immediately cutting through her thin scrubs. Mrs. Chen followed reluctantly, clutching her cardigan closed against the cold. They approached the fence, and Angela's hands found the padlock hanging from the gate. It was new, gleaming silver against the rust, recently oiled. Someone had been here. Someone was still coming here. "We should call the police now," Mrs. Chen said, her teacher's instinct for rules and proper procedures warring with the desperation that had brought them here. "And tell them what?" Angela's voice was sharp. "That we broke into private property based on a hunch and some children's drawings? They already think I'm an hysterical mother who can't accept that her daughter might have run away." She rattled the fence, fury and helplessness coursing through her. "Rebecca didn't run away. She can't run. She can't even walk. But nobody wants to hear that because it's easier to blame me for being a bad mother than to admit something terrible happened on their watch." Mrs. Chen placed a gentle hand on Angela's shoulder. "We'll find another way. Let's walk the perimeter, see if there's a gap in the fence." They followed the fence line through knee-high weeds and brambles that caught on their clothes like grasping fingers. The property was larger than it had appeared from the road, at least 5 acres, most of it swallowed by forest. Behind the main building, they found what looked like a smaller structure, perhaps an old chapel, its white paint peeling like diseased skin. And there, partially hidden by overgrown bushes, was a section of fence where the posts had rotted through, creating a gap just wide enough to squeeze through. Angela went first, ignoring the way the rusted wire scraped her arms. The moment she stepped onto the property, a wave of nausea hit her, whether from fear or some deep, visceral memory. She couldn't tell. This place felt wrong. The air itself seemed thicker here, harder to breathe, as if the ground had absorbed years of suffering and now exhaled it like poison. They approached the chapel first, its door hanging loose on broken hinges. Inside it was dark and smelled of mold and something else, something sweet and rotten that made Angela's stomach turn. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the boarded windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the stale air. Rows of wooden pews sat covered in bird droppings and dead leaves. At the front, where an altar should have been, was just an empty space, and a water stain on the floor shaped disturbingly like a human figure, arms outstretched. "Look at this," Mrs. Chen called from a corner of the chapel. She'd found a door, partially hidden behind a fallen piece of ceiling. It opened onto a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Angela pulled out her phone and activated the flashlight. The stairs were steep and wooden, many of them cracked or missing entirely. But there was something else. Fresh scuff marks on the steps and a handprint in the dust on the railing that couldn't have been more than a few days old. "Someone's been down there recently," Angela said, her heart hammering. She started down the stairs before fear could stop her. The basement was larger than she'd expected, stretching the full length of the chapel above. But it was what covered the walls that made both women freeze in horror. Names. Hundreds of names, carved into the brick with what must have been knives or nails, some old and faded, others fresh enough that dust still clung to the grooves. And beside each name, a date. Angela's flashlight beam moved across the wall, reading inscription after inscription. Sarah Mitchell, March 1998. Thomas Green, July 2000. Marilyn Foster, October 2001. The dates went back more than 20 years, spanning decades of what? Children who'd been here? Children who'd been taken? Each name was followed by the same phrase, carved in the same careful script. Purified and released. Oh my God, Mrs. Chen breathed, her face pale in the flashlight's glow. These are children. All of these are children. Angela's light found something else, a more recent addition, the brick dust still fresh around it. Her breath caught in her throat as she read, Rebecca Hayes, October 2012, awaiting final purification. The phone slipped from Angela's trembling hand, the light spinning wildly across the ceiling before she caught it again. Her daughter's name, carved into this nightmare place. Awaiting, present tense. Which had to mean, she's alive, Angela whispered, and the relief was so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. She's still alive. But Mrs. Chen had moved deeper into the basement, her own phone light illuminating another wall. Angela, she called, her voice strange and hollow. You need to see this. The second wall was covered not with names but with photographs, hundreds of them, pinned directly into the brick. Polaroids mostly faded with age. Children's faces stared out from the wall, some smiling, some crying, some with expressions so blank and empty they looked like dolls. Angela recognized some of the names from the carved list. Sarah Mitchell, a gap-toothed girl of about 7, wearing a white dress and holding a Bible. Thomas Green, a teenager with frightened eyes and hands clasped in prayer. Marilyn Foster, the girl from 2001, her auburn hair braided, her face turned toward something off-camera with an expression of absolute terror. And there, in the center of the wall like a trophy, was a photograph of Rebecca. It had been taken recently, within the last month, judging by the autumn leaves visible in the background. She was sitting in her wheelchair outside a white building, wearing her school uniform and holding her art notebook. But it was her expression that broke Angela's heart. She was smiling, waving at someone behind the camera. Someone she trusted. Someone who'd betrayed that trust. This was planned, Mrs. Chen said, her voice shaking. This whole thing was planned. They've been watching her, photographing her, preparing. A sound from above cut her off. Footsteps, heavy boots on the chapel floor, moving with purpose toward the basement door. Angela grabbed Mrs. Chen's arm and pulled her behind a stack of old filing cabinets in the corner, covering both their phone lights with their hands. The footsteps descended the stairs, slow, deliberate, the sound of someone who had all the time in the world. A flashlight beam swept across the basement, landing on the wall of photographs, then moving to the carved names. The man who emerged into the basement was tall and thin, wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low. But it was the way he moved that made Angela's blood freeze. The precise measured gait of someone who'd walked these steps 1,000 times, who knew every inch of this terrible place. He stood in front of Rebecca's carved name, running his fingers over the letters almost lovingly. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost melodious, the voice of someone accustomed to preaching, to convincing, to lying with conviction. Soon, he said to the empty room, or perhaps to the photographs on the wall, or perhaps to the ghosts of all the children who'd been brought here before. She's almost ready. Just a little more time in the dark, a little more hunger, a little more fear. Then she'll understand that salvation requires sacrifice, that purity requires pain. He turned, and in the split second before Angela covered her mouth to keep from screaming, she saw his face. It was gaunt and lined, the face of someone who'd spent years denying himself comfort in the name of righteousness. But it was his eyes that were truly terrifying, flat and empty, the eyes of someone who'd long ago convinced himself that cruelty was holy. The man climbed the stairs again, his footsteps fading. Angela and Mrs. Chen remained frozen behind the filing cabinets for long minutes after he'd gone, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. When they finally emerged, Angela's legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. "We need to get out of here," Mrs. Chen whispered. "Right now. We need to call the police and—" "He'll move her," Angela interrupted. "The moment the police show up, he'll move her somewhere we'll never find her. We need to follow him, we need to see where he goes." They climbed the basement stairs on trembling legs and emerged into the chapel just in time to see a white van, the same white van Harold had seen on Route 4, pulling away from the property, disappearing down a service road that led deeper into the woods. Angela ran back to her car, Mrs. Chen struggling to keep up. They had to follow that van. They had to find where he was keeping Rebecca, because one thing was certain, her daughter was running out of time. Angela lost the white van within 3 miles. The service road had split into multiple paths through the dense Ohio forest, and by the time she chose which direction to follow, the van had vanished like smoke. She slammed her palms against the steering wheel, a scream of frustration tearing from her throat that made Mrs. Chen flinch in the passenger seat. "We should go to the police now," Mrs. Chen said for the 3rd time, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have evidence. The photographs, the names carved in the wall, your daughter's name. And what if they don't believe us?" Angela's voice cracked. "What if they think we broke in and staged it? What if they waste time getting warrants while that man does God knows what to my baby?" But even as she argued, Angela knew Mrs. Chen was right. They needed help. They needed someone with authority who would actually listen. She turned the Honda around and headed back toward Dayton, her mind racing through options. Sheriff Daniels had been kind but ultimately dismissive. The school administration was clearly involved in some kind of cover-up. Who could she trust? The answer came to her as they passed the Riverside Diner where they'd met earlier. Detective Miller, her father's best friend from the Army. The man who'd come to Daniel Hayes' funeral and slipped Angela an envelope with $500 and a note that said, "For Rebecca." He would have wanted her taken care of. Miller had retired from the police force 5 years ago, but Angela had heard he still took private cases, still had connections throughout the department. She pulled into a gas station and used the payphone. Her cell battery was dying, and she didn't trust that her calls weren't being monitored. Miller answered on the 4th ring, his voice gravelly from decades of cigarettes and whiskey. "Angela Hayes," he said after she identified herself. "Haven't heard from you in years. What's wrong?" The fact that he immediately knew something was wrong, that he didn't waste time with pleasantries or ask about Rebecca's health, made Angela's throat tight with emotion. She told him everything in a rush. Rebecca's disappearance, the shoes on the fence, Glory Shelter, the basement with its carved names and photographs, the man in the van. Miller listened without interrupting, and when she finished, his silence stretched so long she thought the connection had been lost. "Miller, are you there?" "I'm here." His voice had changed, grown harder. "Angela, I need you to listen very carefully. Don't go home, don't go anywhere predictable. Find a motel, pay cash, and text me the address. I'll be there in 2 hours. "What?" "Why? Because Glory Shelter didn't just close down, it was shut down by a federal investigation that went nowhere. Too many powerful people were involved. Politicians, judges, police officers. The case file disappeared. Witnesses recanted. And the lead investigator, a friend of mine named Sarah Chen, was killed in a car accident 3 weeks after the investigation was closed." Mrs. Chen made a small sound in the passenger seat. "Sarah Chen was my sister." The coincidence, if it was a coincidence, made Angela's blood run cold. Miller continued, his words coming faster now. Urgent. "If you've seen what you say you've seen, if you've found evidence, then you're in danger. Both of you. These people don't leave witnesses. They don't leave loose ends. Promise me you'll stay hidden until I get there." Angela promised, hung up, and turned to Mrs. Chen. The art teacher's face had gone white, her hands trembling in her lap. "My sister didn't die in an accident," Mrs. Chen said softly. "I always knew she didn't, but no one would listen. They said she was driving too fast, that she lost control, that it was just bad luck. But Sarah was the most careful driver I knew. She wore her seatbelt religiously. She never drank, never texted while driving. And the night before she died, she called me and said she'd found something big, something that was going to blow the Glory Shelter case wide open. The next day, her car went off a bridge. The two women stared at each other, the full weight of what they'd stumbled into settling over them like a shroud. This wasn't just about Rebecca. This was about decades of children being taken, abused, possibly killed. This was about corruption that reached into the highest levels of local government. This was about people who murdered to protect their secrets. They found a motel 20 miles outside Dayton, a rundown place called the Sleepy Hollow Inn that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions. Angela paid for 2 nights in cash using money she'd been saving for Rebecca's physical therapy. The room smelled like cigarette smoke and mildew. The carpet was stained with substances she didn't want to identify. but the door had a deadbolt, and the window faced the parking lot where they could see anyone approaching. Mrs. Chen sat on one of the beds and finally broke down, sobs shaking her small frame. "All these years," she cried. "All these years I thought I was crazy for not believing it was an accident. But I was right. Sarah was murdered, and now we're in the same position she was." Angela wanted to comfort her, but she had no comfort to give. Instead, she pulled out the folder of Rebecca's drawings and spread them across the other bed, studying them with new eyes. Every detail felt significant now, every shadow potentially hiding a clue. The building with the cross, glory shelter. The faceless man, the one they'd seen in the basement perhaps, or Reverend Warren himself. But what about the white dove that appeared in every drawing? What did that mean? Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Stop looking. She's already gone. You'll never find her. Give up or join her." Angela's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. Someone knew where they were. Someone was watching. But how? They'd been so careful, had paid cash, Her eyes fell on Mrs. Chen's purse, where the teacher's smartphone sat with its screen glowing faintly. Location services, of course. They could track phones, could follow their every movement. Angela grabbed the phone and yanked out the battery, then did the same to her own. "We need to leave," Angela said. "Right now. They know we're here." But before they could move, a knock came at the door. Hard, authoritative. The knock of someone accustomed to doors being opened for them immediately. Through the peephole, Angela saw a police officer in uniform, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "Mrs. Hayes," he called through the door. "This is Officer Brennan with the Dayton PD. I need to speak with you about your daughter's case. Please open the door." Angela's mind raced. Miller had said the police were involved, that some of them were part of the cover-up. But which ones? Could she trust this officer, or was he here to silence them? "I want to see your badge through the peephole," Angela called back. The officer complied, holding up his badge. It looked real, but Angela had no idea what a fake badge might look like. She turned to Mrs. Chen, whose face had gone from white to gray. The teacher shook her head violently. "Don't open it." "Mrs. Hayes, I understand you're frightened," Officer Brennan said, his voice growing harder. "But you and Mrs. Chen broke into private property today. We have you on security cameras. You need to come down to the station and answer some questions." Security cameras. At an abandoned building. Angela's blood turned to ice. This wasn't a rescue. It was a threat. They'd been filmed, which meant there was evidence of them trespassing, which meant they could be arrested, discredited, silenced. "I'm calling Detective Miller," Angela shouted through the door. "He's on his way." "Miller's retired, ma'am. He has no authority here. Now please open the door or I'll be forced to enter." Angela grabbed Mrs. Chen's hand and pulled her toward the bathroom window. It was small, barely large enough to squeeze through, but it was their only option. She pushed it open just as Officer Brennan's boot connected with the motel room door, splintering the cheap wood around the lock. They tumbled through the window, landing hard in the alley behind the motel. Angela's knee screamed in pain, but adrenaline drove her forward. They ran through the darkness, through parking lots and between buildings, their breath coming in ragged gasps, the sound of pursuit echoing behind them. By the time they collapsed behind a dumpster 3 blocks away, Angela's lungs were burning and her vision was spotting. Mrs. Chen was crying again, gulping air between sobs, her cardigan torn and her hands bleeding from where she'd scraped them on the pavement. "What do we do now?" Mrs. Chen whispered. "Where do we go?" Angela had no answer. They had no phones, no transportation. They'd left the Honda at the motel, no money beyond the few bills in Angela's pocket. They were being hunted by people with badges and authority. And somewhere in the darkness, Rebecca was running out of time. Then Angela remembered something. Harold Griffin, the farmer who'd found the shoes. Miller had mentioned him in their phone call, said he'd been questioned. Harold lived alone, was outside the system, and most importantly, he'd seen something that morning on Route 4. Maybe he'd seen more than he'd told the police. Maybe he was the only person left they could trust. "We're going to see the farmer," Angela said, pulling Mrs. Chen to her feet. "We're going to find out what he really saw. And then we're going to find my daughter." It took Angela and Mrs. Chen 3 hours to reach Harold Griffin's farm on foot, walking along back roads and cutting through fields to avoid being seen. By the time they stumbled up his gravel driveway, their clothes were soaked with dew, their shoes caked with mud, and exhaustion had settled into their bones like lead. The farmhouse was dark except for a single light burning in what looked like the kitchen. It was past midnight. Angela knocked, gently at first, then harder when no one answered. She was about to knock again when the porch light suddenly flooded on, blinding them. The door opened a crack, and the barrel of a shotgun emerged, followed by Harold Griffin's weathered face. "I don't want trouble," Harold said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I've already talked to the police. I don't know anything more." "Please," Angela said, stepping into the light so he could see her face clearly. "I'm Rebecca Hayes' mother. My daughter is the one whose shoes you found. I think you know more than you told the police. I think you remember something you're afraid to say." Harold's expression shifted. Surprise, then recognition, then something that looked like shame. The shotgun lowered slightly. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." "Nowhere is safe," Angela replied. "They're hunting us. The police, or people pretending to be police. We have nowhere else to go." Harold stared at them for a long moment. These two desperate women shivering on his porch in the middle of the night, and something in his soldier's heart, the part that had once sworn to protect the innocent, made his decision. He opened the door wider. "Get inside. Quickly." The kitchen smelled like coffee and something burning. Toast left too long in the toaster. Harold gestured for them to sit at the table while he bolted the door and drew the curtains. When he turned back to them, the shotgun was propped against the wall but still within reach. "I'm going to tell you something," Harold said, pouring them coffee with hands that shook slightly. "Something I should have told the police, but I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. Or worse, that they would." He sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. "I knew your daughter. 3 years ago, she was in an art program I volunteered for. I forgot, convinced myself I forgot. But after I found those shoes, the memories came back." He disappeared into another room and returned with a box of drawings. Rebecca's drawings from years ago. Angela's hands trembled as she looked through them, seeing her daughter's artwork, her careful signature, her little girl handwriting. And there, among the innocent pictures of flowers and butterflies, were the disturbing ones. The building with the cross, the faceless man, the white dove. "This building," Angela said, pointing. "It's Glory Shelter. We were there today. We found a basement with names carved into the walls. Children's names going back 20 years. And Rebecca's name was there. Harold. Fresh. Recent. It said, 'Awaiting final purification.'" Harold's face went gray. He stood abruptly and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a bottle of whiskey. This time he didn't hesitate before pouring himself a generous glass. "I need to show you something else. Something I found tonight." He led them through the house to what appeared to be his bedroom, but the bed was pushed aside, and a section of the wooden floor had been pried up, revealing a crawl space beneath. "I couldn't sleep," Harold explained. "Kept thinking about those shoes, about Rebecca, about why someone would choose my fence. So I started looking, really looking, at my property, at my house, and I found this." He climbed down into the crawl space and emerged with an old cassette recorder, the kind that hadn't been made in decades. It was hidden under the insulation. Someone put it here deliberately recently. The tape inside is new. Harold pressed play. The tape hissed with static. Then a voice emerged. Young, frightened, unmistakably Rebecca's. "I don't want to go back there. He says I have to be pure, but I don't know what that means. He makes me sit in the dark and pray until I can't feel my legs anymore. But I can't feel them anyway, so how do I know when it's enough?" Angela's hand flew to her mouth, a sob breaking through. Her daughter's voice, her baby's voice, recorded in terror. The recording continued. "There's a room under the church. He calls it the purification chamber. There are other kids' names on the wall, so many names. He says they all became pure. He says they all went to heaven. But I think heaven is just another word for dead." A sound of a door opening. Rebecca's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. "He's coming. He said today is the test. He said if I pass, I get to see Grandma Rose. But if I fail..." The recording cut off abruptly, replaced by another voice. Male, cold, methodical. "This recording will serve as evidence of the girl's progress. Subject Rebecca Hayes, age 8, day 14 of preliminary conditioning. She shows resistance, which is expected. The disabled ones always resist longer. Their bodies have already failed them, so their spirits cling more desperately to hope. We will break that hope. We must. Only through complete despair can purification begin." The voice paused. and they could hear papers rustling. Previous subjects required an average of 30 days. Subject Marilyn Foster required 47 days before achieving full submission. Subject Rebecca Hayes shows similar resilience. We may need to escalate methods. Recommend proceeding to Phase 2, isolation and sensory deprivation. If she survives this phase, she will be ready for final purification. The recording ended. The silence that followed was suffocating. That recording is 3 years old, Harold said quietly. Rebecca was 8. They had her for at least 14 days back then, but somehow she got away. Or they let her go. I don't know which. My mother, Angela whispered, pieces falling into place like shards of broken glass. My mother must have taken her. Rose was involved with Glory Shelter. She must have volunteered Rebecca for their program, told them about her disability, handed her over, and then when it went too far, or when the investigation started, she brought Rebecca back, made it look like nothing happened. Mrs. Chen's face was pale. But if they had her before, if they already started the process and she escaped or was released, then this isn't a new kidnapping. This is them finishing what they started. They've been waiting for years, watching her grow, planning, and now they've taken her back to complete the purification. Angela felt like the floor was tilting beneath her. All those years she'd thought Rebecca was safe, thought they'd escaped her mother's influence. Rebecca had been living with the trauma of something Angela didn't even know had happened. All those drawings hadn't been imagination. They'd been memory. They'd been testimony. "Where is this recording from?" Angela demanded. "How did it end up in your crawl space?" "I don't know," Harold admitted, "but someone wanted it found. Someone is leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. The shoes on my fence, this recording in my house. It's like someone on the inside wants this exposed but is too afraid to come forward directly. Or it's a trap," Mrs. Chen said. "Someone leading us exactly where they want us to go." A sound outside made all three of them freeze. The crunch of gravel, a car door closing. Harold grabbed his shotgun and moved to the window, peeking through a gap in the curtains. "It's a truck, Detective Miller's truck." Angela's relief was profound. Miller. Finally, someone with authority who might believe them, who might help. Harold opened the door and Miller walked in, looking older and more tired than Angela remembered. But when his eyes met hers, they were sharp with urgency. "We have a problem," Miller said without preamble. "Harold Griffin, your barn is on fire." They ran outside to see flames already consuming the old structure behind the house, orange and red against the night sky. Harold made a strangled sound and started running toward it, but Miller grabbed him. "It's too late, let it burn, that's not why I'm here." Miller turned to Angela. "While you were walking here, I was digging into Glory Shelter's old case files, the ones that weren't officially destroyed. I found something. Plans for an underground facility, built beneath the old chapel. Multiple rooms, designed for long-term containment. The official records show it was sealed during the closure, filled with concrete. But I checked with the construction company. That work order was canceled at the last minute. The facility was never sealed. It's still accessible." "Then that's where she is," Angela said, already moving toward Miller's truck. "We need to go back right now." "It's not that simple." Miller pulled out his phone, showing them a photograph. "This was taken 2 hours ago by a private security camera near the property. Look who's there." The photograph showed the entrance to Glory Shelter, illuminated by vehicle headlights. And standing in front of the building, clearly visible, was Officer Brennan, the same cop who tried to break into their motel room. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood 2 other figures. A woman in business attire that Angela recognized as the school district's superintendent, and a man in black clergy clothes, Reverend Elliot Warren, still alive, still free, still taking children. "How many of them are there?" Angela whispered. "How deep does this go?" "Deep enough that we can't trust the police. Deep enough that we need hard evidence before we make a move, or they'll disappear and take Rebecca with them." Miller met her eyes. "But I know a way in. A service tunnel that was built for maintenance. It's our only shot." As Harold's barn collapsed in flames behind them, sending sparks spiraling into the October night like dying stars, Angela made her decision. She would go into that underground hell. She would face whatever horrors waited there, because Rebecca was running out of time and a mother's love was the only weapon she had left. The service tunnel entrance was hidden in a grove of dead trees half a mile from Glory Shelter's main property, disguised as an old storm drain. Miller had obtained the original construction blueprints from a contractor friend, who'd worked on the facility's expansion in 1997. Blueprints that showed a network of underground passages connecting the chapel to several outbuildings. The tunnel was narrow, barely 4 feet high, forcing them to crouch as they moved through it. Water dripped from the concrete ceiling, and the air smelled like rot and rust. Angela went first, followed by Miller, then Harold and Mrs. Chen. Each of them carried flashlights that Miller had provided, the beams cutting through darkness so complete it felt solid. Angela's heart hammered against her ribs with such force she thought the others must be able to hear it. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to run, to find safety. But the memory of Rebecca's voice on that recording, "I think heaven is just another word for dead," pushed her forward. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the tunnel opened into a larger space. A maintenance room with rusted pipes and electrical panels covered in decades of grime. Miller consulted his blueprints by flashlight. According to this, there should be a door behind that shelving unit. It leads directly to the underground facility's east corridor. He paused, his expression grim. "Once we go through, there's no turning back. These people have killed to protect their secrets. They won't hesitate to kill again." "Then we don't give them the chance," Harold said. His shotgun held steady despite his age. The old soldier had emerged from beneath the broken farmer's exterior, and his eyes were hard with purpose. They moved the shelving unit, slowly, quietly, trying not to make noise that might alert anyone above. Behind it was indeed a door, metal and heavy, with a lock that had been recently oiled. Miller produced a set of lockpicks, his hands working with practiced efficiency. The lock clicked open. The corridor beyond was lit by emergency lights that cast everything in sickly yellow. The walls were cinder block, painted institutional green, and the floor was concrete stained with substances Angela didn't want to identify. They moved in silence, Miller in the lead with his service weapon drawn, despite his retirement. The first room they found was empty except for a metal bed frame bolted to the floor and chains attached to the wall. Scratch marks covered the cinder blocks, desperate, frantic scratches that had worn through the paint to the concrete beneath. Someone had been kept here, restrained here, had clawed at the walls trying to escape. The second room was worse. It was larger, maybe 15 feet square, and completely dark. The emergency lights didn't extend inside. When Angela shone her flashlight in, she saw what looked like a sensory deprivation chamber. Padding covered the walls to muffle sound. In the center was a chair with restraints, and beside it, a table with instruments Angela recognized from her work at the hospital. IV stands, medical restraints, syringes, but also instruments she didn't recognize. Strange metal devices whose purpose she could only imagine with horror. "They were experimenting on them," Mrs. Chen whispered, her voice breaking. "On children. They were torturing children in the name of God." They moved deeper into the facility, finding more rooms, each more disturbing than the last. One contained filing cabinets full of medical records, pages and pages documenting treatments and progress reports for dozens of children over 20 years. Another room was filled with personal belongings, shoes of all sizes, arranged in neat rows like a grotesque collection, backpacks with names written in marker, stuffed animals with the fur worn away from desperate clutching. And there in the third row Angela found them, Rebecca's red Converse shoes, not the ones hanging on the fence. Those had been a decoy, a message. These were Rebecca's actual shoes, the ones she'd been wearing when she was taken. They were dirty now, scuffed, with one lace broken. Angela picked them up with trembling hands and held them against her chest. Her daughter's shoes, evidence that Rebecca had been here, had walked these halls, had suffered in these rooms. "Angela," Miller called softly from down the corridor, "you need to see this." The room at the end of the hall was different from the others. It had a heavy door with multiple locks, and a small window covered with wire mesh. Miller was peering through the window, his flashlight illuminating the interior. When Angela looked inside, her breath stopped. It was a cell, a prison cell designed for a child. There was a cot with a thin mattress, a bucket in the corner for waste, and walls covered in something that made Angela's stomach turn. Scratch marks like the other room, but these formed patterns. Words. Dozens of words scratched into the concrete with what must have been fingernails or rocks. "Help me, Mama. It hurts. I want to go home. Please, God, make it stop." And there, fresher than the others, scratched with desperate intensity. "Rebecca was here. Rebecca is still alive. Don't forget Rebecca. But Rebecca wasn't in this cell. It was empty except for something on the cot, a notebook. Angela's hands shook so badly that Miller had to pick the locks on the door for her. The moment it swung open, she rushed inside and grabbed the notebook. It was Rebecca's art notebook, the one she'd been clutching when she was taken. But it had new drawings, pages and pages of them, drawn in the dark with whatever tools she could find. Some were done in pencil, others in what looked like charcoal or even blood. They showed the rooms Angela had just walked through. They showed men in dark clothes. They showed children crying. And on the last page, drawn with heartbreaking precision, was a map. Rebecca had drawn a map of the entire facility from memory. Each room was labeled in her careful handwriting: purification chamber, prayer room, the waiting place, final door. And at the far end of the facility, in a room marked with an X, she'd written, "Where they take the pure ones, where they go to heaven." "She's documenting everything," Miller said, studying the map over Angela's shoulder. "She's leaving evidence. This girl is brilliant." But Harold was focused on something else. "Look at the dates," he said, pointing to numbers written in the corner of each drawing. Rebecca had dated every page. The first was from 4 days ago, the day after she was taken. The last was from yesterday, which meant she'd been in this cell recently, which meant she might still be close. A sound from above froze them all. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose across the chapel floor directly overhead. Voices filtered down through the ceiling, muffled but audible. "Moving her tonight. Too risky to keep her here any longer." That was Officer Brennan's voice. "The ritual isn't complete." An older man's voice, cultured and cold. "Reverend Warren. She hasn't achieved full submission. If we release her now, she'll talk. They always talk when they're released too soon. Then we don't release her." A woman's voice, the superintendent. "She's disabled, Elliot. Who would believe her anyway? We make her disappear completely. Say she ran away, fell in a river, anything." "No." Warren's voice was firm. "I will not have another failure. Marilyn Foster haunts me still. This girl will be purified properly, or she'll serve as an example to the others." The footsteps moved away, but the implications of what they'd heard settled over the group like ice water. They were planning to move Rebecca tonight, and they were planning to kill her if the purification failed. "We need to find her now," Angela said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. "The map shows one more room, the final door. That's where she is." They followed Rebecca's hand-drawn map through corridors that grew progressively narrower and darker. The emergency lights gave way to complete blackness, forcing them to rely solely on their flashlights. The air grew colder, and their breath came out in visible puffs. At the end of the longest corridor was a door unlike the others, wooden, ancient, with symbols carved into it that made Angela's skin crawl. Religious symbols twisted into something that looked more like blasphemy than faith. Miller tried the handle. Locked. But this lock was different, old-fashioned, requiring a key. Harold stepped forward with his shotgun. "Move back." The blast echoed through the underground facility like thunder, surely alerting everyone above to their presence. But the lock shattered and the door swung open. The room beyond was pitch black and silent as a tomb. Angela's flashlight beam swept across the space, and what she saw made her knees buckle. 2 iron beds, just as Rebecca had drawn. Both empty, sheets torn and stained. Marks on the walls counting days. Someone had been keeping track, scratching lines into the concrete. Dozens of lines, maybe hundreds. And on the floor, arranged in a circle like a memorial, were small shoes. Children's shoes. Each pair with a handwritten tag attached. Names and dates spanning 2 decades. Sarah Mitchell, 1998. Thomas Green, 2000. Marilyn Foster, 2001. All the names from the wall in the chapel basement. All the children who'd been brought here for purification. All the children who'd never left. But Rebecca wasn't here. The room was empty. Angela's despair was absolute. They'd come so far, risked everything, and her daughter was gone. Taken somewhere else. Somewhere they'd never find in time. Then Mrs. Chen noticed something. "Look," she said, pointing to the wall behind one of the beds. More scratches, but these were recent. Fresh. They formed words. "They moved me. The white van. I counted 17 turns. Listen for bells." Bells. Angela's mind raced back to Rebecca's drawings, the building with bells on the roof. Not Glory Shelter. Somewhere else. Another location where they were keeping her. The sound of sirens in the distance made them all freeze. Someone had called the police. They had minutes, maybe seconds, before this place was swarming with officers. Some legitimate, some corrupt, all of them potentially dangerous. "We need to go," Miller said urgently. "Now, before they trap us down here." But as they turned to flee, Angela saw one more thing. Tucked under the pillow of one of the beds was a single drawing, clearly left there deliberately. Rebecca had drawn herself sitting in her wheelchair, but she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a woman, tall, gray-haired, with kind eyes, and written at the bottom, "Marilyn's mom is here too. She's helping me be brave. Marilyn Foster, the girl from 2001. Angela remembered the carved message. She'll be the last. After her, he'll stop. But he hadn't stopped. He'd never stopped. And now, somehow, Marilyn's mother was involved in this nightmare too. They emerged from the service tunnel into a dawn that felt like mockery, beautiful and golden. The October sky streaked with pink and orange, birds singing as if the world wasn't full of monsters. Behind them, sirens wailed as police vehicles converged on Glory Shelter. But Angela, Miller, Harold, and Mrs. Chen were already gone, racing through the forest toward Miller's truck hidden in an abandoned gas station 2 miles away. 17 turns and bells, Angela repeated as they ran, her lungs burning. Where would that take us from Glory Shelter? What building has bells? There are dozens of churches in the area, Miller said, breathing hard as they reached his truck. We need to narrow it down. Think, what did Rebecca's drawing show? Angela pulled out the folder of Rebecca's artwork that she'd somehow managed to keep through everything. Her hands were filthy, her clothes torn, but these drawings were pristine, protected. She spread them across the truck's hood, studying each one with desperate intensity. There, in the background of one drawing, barely visible, was a detail she'd missed before. A sign. Rebecca had drawn it tiny, almost invisible, but Angela could make out the letters. St. Agnes. St. Agnes Church, Harold said immediately. It's about 20 miles northeast of here, near the reservoir. It was deconsecrated 15 years ago after the diocese ran out of money. It's been abandoned ever since. I used to hunt in those woods before my knees gave out. They climbed into Miller's truck, and he floored the accelerator. The vehicle rattled and groaned, but it moved. As they drove, Angela's phone, which she'd kept turned off, suddenly vibrated. She'd replaced the battery against her better judgment, desperate for any information. A text from an unknown number. She's running out of time. The final purification begins at sunrise. After that, she'll be pure. After that, she'll be silent forever. Angela checked her watch. Sunrise was in 18 minutes. Faster, she urged Miller, though he was already pushing the ancient truck to its limits. We have 18 minutes. St. Agnes Church appeared through the trees like a ghost from another era. A Gothic revival structure with a bell tower that stretched toward the sky like an accusing finger. The morning light made the stained glass windows glow with colors that would have been beautiful in any other context. But here, now, they looked like eyes watching their approach. 2 vehicles were parked in the overgrown lot, the white van and a black sedan. Officer Brennan's patrol car was nowhere to be seen, but Angela knew he had to be here. They all had to be here. Miller parked the truck out of sight and checked his weapon. Here's what we know. Reverend Warren is likely inside, along with at least 2 others, Brennan and the superintendent. We don't know if there are more. We don't know exactly where Rebecca is in the building. And we have, he checked his watch, 15 minutes before whatever they're planning happens. Then we split up, Harold said, loading his shotgun with steady hands. 2 teams. Angela and I go through the front. Loud, obvious, draw their attention. Miller and Mrs. Chen find another way in, locate Rebecca, get her out. I should go with Miller, Angela protested. She's my daughter. Which is exactly why you need to be the distraction, Harold interrupted gently. They expect you. They want you. If you go in, they'll focus on you. That gives Miller his chance. Angela hated it. Hated every part of this plan that kept her from being the one to find Rebecca. But she knew Harold was right. She nodded, her throat too tight for words. Miller and Mrs. Chen disappeared around the back of the church while Angela and Harold approached the front entrance. The heavy wooden doors were unlocked, swinging open with a horror movie creak that would have been comical in any other circumstance. Inside, the church was dim despite the sunrise streaming through the stained glass. Pews were overturned, the altar was bare, and pigeons roosted in the rafters, cooing softly. "Rebecca," Angela called out, her voice echoing through the abandoned space. "Rebecca, baby, it's Mama, I'm here." Silence. Then footsteps from above, from the bell tower. A door opened on a balcony overlooking the nave, and Reverend Elliot Warren emerged. He was tall and skeletal, wearing black clergy clothes that hung on his frame like funeral shrouds. His face was gaunt to the point of appearing skull-like, but his eyes were alive with fervent intensity. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of a lifetime of sermons. "I've been expecting you. Your daughter speaks of you often in her prayers. She asks God why you abandoned her to her suffering, why you never tried to make her pure. Where is she?" Angela's voice shook with rage. "Where is my daughter, you monster?" "Monster?" Warren's laugh was dry as dead leaves. "I am a servant of the Lord. I take the broken, the afflicted, the impure, and I give them purpose. Your daughter's body is corrupt, Mrs. Hayes. It has failed her since birth. But her soul can still be saved if she submits to purification." "You're insane," Angela spat. "You're a predator hiding behind religion. You've been torturing children for decades and calling it salvation." Warren's expression didn't change. "Torture is what God inflicted on Job to test his faith. Torture is what the martyrs endured to prove their devotion. These children are blessed to be chosen for such holy work. And your daughter, she is the most blessed of all. She will be my masterpiece. She will be perfectly pure." A sound from the bell tower above Warren. Bells, ringing once, twice, 3 times. Not the joyful peal of celebration, but slow, deliberate, ominous. Rebecca's clue. "Listen for bells." "She's in the bell tower," Angela breathed, already moving toward the stairs. But Officer Brennan emerged from the shadows, his weapon drawn and pointed directly at her chest. "That's far enough," Brennan said. His face was blank, professional, the face of a man just doing his job. Except his job was protecting a child abuser, a murderer, a monster. "Mrs. Hayes, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, trespassing, and interfering with a police investigation." Harold raised his shotgun. "Lower your weapon, officer. Don't do this, old man. You'll die for nothing." "I've been dying for nothing for 40 years, Harold replied calmly. "Might as well die for something that matters." The standoff held for 3 heartbeats. Then chaos erupted. Miller appeared on the balcony behind Warren, his gun pressed to the Reverend's head. "Federal agent," Miller shouted, though he hadn't been federal in 20 years. "Drop your weapons now." Brennan spun toward Miller and Harold fired. The blast caught Brennan in the shoulder, spinning him around. His weapon discharged into the ceiling, sending plaster raining down. Angela didn't wait. She ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time despite her exhaustion, her terror, her desperate need to reach her daughter. The bell tower stairs seemed endless, spiraling up and up. Her legs screamed, her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. At the top, she burst through a door into the bell chamber, a small room dominated by the massive bronze bells and their ropes. And there, chained to a post beneath the bells, was Rebecca. Her daughter looked like a ghost of herself, thin to the point of emaciation, her face pale and hollow-eyed, her clothes filthy and torn, but she was alive. She was conscious, and when she saw Angela, her face transformed with an emotion so powerful it was almost painful to witness. Hope mixed with disbelief, joy mixed with terror that this might be a dream or hallucination. "Mama?" Rebecca's voice was a whisper, hoarse from screaming or crying or both. "Are you real?" "I'm real, baby. I'm here." Angela fell to her knees beside her daughter, her hands shaking as she examined the chains. They were padlocked, heavy industrial locks she had no hope of breaking. "I'm going to get you out, I promise. I'm never leaving you again." Behind them, footsteps on the stairs. The superintendent appeared in the doorway, and in her hands was not a weapon, but a syringe filled with clear liquid. "You're too late," the woman said calmly. "The purification is complete. We gave her the serum an hour ago. In minutes, her heart will stop. She'll die pure and innocent, and her soul will ascend to heaven. It's a mercy, really. Better than the life of suffering she would have endured in that broken body." Angela's world stopped. Serum. Poison. They'd poisoned her daughter. "No," Angela whispered, pulling Rebecca against her chest. No, 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 you're lying. You're lying. But Rebecca's skin was cold, clammy. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. Her lips were turning blue. There's no antidote, the superintendent continued almost conversationally. It's painless. She'll simply fall asleep and not wake up, just like the others. Just like Marilyn Foster, who fought so hard but succumbed in the end. Your daughter will be another name on our wall of the saved. Angela looked into Rebecca's eyes, those enormous, beautiful eyes, and saw the fear there, but also something else. Trust. After everything, after being abandoned to these monsters, her daughter still trusted her to save her. The drawing, Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible. In my notebook, the white dove. That's Marilyn's mom. She's been leaving you clues. She's been trying to help. She knows about the antidote. A commotion from below, Miller's voice shouting, Mrs. Chen screaming. And then a new voice, one Angela hadn't heard in 12 years. Let my granddaughter go. Rose Hayes appeared in the doorway, older and frailer than Angela remembered, but her eyes were fierce, and in her hands was a different syringe. I made a terrible mistake, Rose said, tears streaming down her weathered face. I believed Elliot when he said he was doing God's work. I brought you here when you were 8, Rebecca. I let them start the purification, and then I saw what they did to Marilyn Foster, saw her die, and I realized the truth. I've been trying to stop this ever since. I've been the one leaving clues. The shoes on the fence, the recording, the photographs. I wanted someone to find them, to stop them because I was too much of a coward to go to the police myself. She pushed past the superintendent and knelt beside Angela and Rebecca, injecting the contents of the syringe into Rebecca's arm. That's the real antidote. The one I stole from Elliot's safe. It will counteract the poison, but she needs a hospital. Now. The superintendent lunged for Rose, but Harold appeared in the doorway, his shotgun raised. Don't move. Below, sirens. Real sirens this time. State police, FBI, an ambulance. Miller had made the calls, had contacted people he trusted, people outside the local corruption. Help was coming. Rebecca's eyes fluttered closed, and Angela held her daughter against her heart, feeling the weak but steady beat, praying to any god who would listen that she hadn't found her only to lose her again. Rebecca Hayes survived, but her recovery took months, physically from the poison that nearly stopped her heart, and emotionally from trauma that no child should ever endure. Angela never returned to her cleaning job at the hospital. Instead, she became an advocate for missing children, working with Miller and federal investigators to expose the full scope of the Glory Shelter network. 17 people were arrested, including Officer Brennan, the school superintendent, and 4 other officials who'd spent decades protecting Reverend Warren's operation. Warren himself died of a heart attack in custody before trial, taking some secrets to his grave. But the children he'd hurt, the ones who survived and the ones who didn't, their stories finally came into the light. Rose Hayes testified against her former congregation, seeking redemption she knew she could never fully earn. And Harold Griffin, the broken veteran who'd forgotten a little girl's face, became the grandfather Rebecca never had, teaching her that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is remember what we've tried so hard to forget. This story forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How many times do we look away because seeing the truth is too painful? How many children suffer in silence because the adults around them choose comfort over courage? If you were Angela, would you have had the strength to keep searching when everyone told you to give up? If you were Harold, would you have found the courage to remember? Evil doesn't always announce itself with horns and fangs. Sometimes it wears a collar, carries a badge, or hides behind the word of God. But love, real love, the kind that refuses to surrender even when hope seems lost, that's the force that brings monsters into the light. Rebecca left breadcrumbs in the darkness because she believed someone would care enough to follow them. Angela followed because a mother's love is stronger than any corruption, any conspiracy, any silence. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the children who are still waiting for someone to notice their pain, then share it. Follow our channel for more stories that matter, stories that remind us why we must never stop paying attention, never stop asking questions, never stop fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves. Leave a like, leave a comment telling us what you felt, and most importantly, look around you. Someone might be leaving breadcrumbs right now, hoping you'll be brave enough to see them.